The Warren Commission had 888 pages to tell you what happened in Dallas on November 22, 1963. The CIA had more than 1,000 files on Lee Harvey Oswald before the first shot was fired. They never mentioned, for 60 years, the official story held, a lone gunman, no conspiracy, case closed. But the declassified documents don't close the case. They reopen it. And the question they raise isn't just who killed John F. Kennedy. It's what the agencies sworn to protect him already knew, and chose not to say. November 1963. The Cold War is at its most paranoid. The Cuban Missile Crisis is barely a year in the past. The CIA is running covert operations against Fidel Castro, Operation Mongoose, with a network of Cuban exile groups, hired assassins, and informants stretching from Miami to Mexico City. Into this world, Lee Harvey Oswald, former Marine, Soviet defector, 1959. Readmitted to the United States in 1962, which alone raised questions that were never fully answered. By the fall of 1963, Oswald is in New Orleans, handing out pro-Castro leaflets on the street, making himself visible, loudly, almost theatrically visible. The CIA has a file on him, has had one since December 1960. Inside the agency's counterintelligence division, run by the deeply secretive James Jesus Angleton, Oswald's movements are being tracked. What Angleton's division does with that information is one of the central unanswered questions in the entire declassified record. In late September 1963, less than 2 months before the assassination, Oswald travels to Mexico City. He visits the Soviet embassy. He visits the Cuban consulate. He is attempting to obtain a visa to travel to Cuba, and then onward back to the Soviet Union. He meets with a Soviet consul named Valery Kostikov. The CIA's own records identify Kostikov as an officer of the KGB's Department 13, the department responsible for assassinations abroad. Now consider where Oswald is standing. The CIA's Mexico City station photographs everyone entering and exiting both embassies. They intercept phone calls. That block of Mexico City is, at that exact moment, one of the most heavily surveilled pieces of real estate on Earth, and Oswald walks right through it. The declassified documents confirm this. The CIA knew Oswald was there. They had intercepted his phone calls. They had photographs. One turned out to be someone else entirely, which raised its own set of questions. And when Oswald returned to Dallas in October, the Mexico City station sent a detailed cable to CIA headquarters describing his visit. Headquarters acknowledged it. The Warren Commission, convened specifically to investigate Kennedy's murder, was never given the full picture of what the CIA had known about those 6 weeks. But the Mexico City files are not the most disturbing revelation in the declassified record. That comes from a man named George Jones. In 1963, Jones was the CIA's case officer in Miami for a Cuban exile organization called the DRE, the Directorio Revolucionario Estudiantil. In August 1963, the DRE had a direct, documented confrontation with Lee Harvey Oswald on the streets of New Orleans. They debated him publicly. They filmed him distributing pro-Castro leaflets. They actively publicized his activities to the press. Jones was their handler. He was funding them, directing them, and reporting on them. He knew exactly who Oswald was. In 1978, when the House Select Committee on Assassinations reopened the Kennedy case, ultimately concluding there was, in their words, probably a conspiracy, the CIA assigned a liaison officer to assist the committee's investigation. They assigned George Jones. He never disclosed his 1963 role to the committee, not once. He was, in effect, positioned inside an official government investigation into events he had been directly connected to, and the committee had no idea. This wasn't uncovered until historian Jefferson Morley sued the CIA under the Freedom of Information Act, decades after the fact. The CIA fought that lawsuit for years. Selected Joanide's files remain classified to this day. The declassified documents do not prove a conspiracy. That is the honest answer. What they prove is something arguably more troubling: that the agencies investigating the assassination were actively concealing their prior knowledge of the assassin. That a man directly connected to Oswald in the weeks before Dallas was secretly placed inside the investigation meant to find the truth. And that more than 60 years later, the United States government is still withholding documents it has never publicly explained. In 2023, the National Archives confirmed that hundreds of JFK assassination records remain classified, still citing national security concerns. For a murder committed in 1963, the Warren Commission told you the case was closed. The files suggest someone made very sure that certain doors stayed locked. The question we're sitting with isn't only who pulled the trigger on Elm Street, it's who already knew the name of the man holding the gun and said nothing.